2016, ARSA had evolved into a professional, well-organised and well-trained group. A report of the International Crisis Group found that the main fighting force was made up of trained Muslim villagers in northern Rakhine State who had been organised into village-level cells. This local support was vital. The International Crisis Group observed that it would not have been possible for ARSA to establish itself and make detailed preparations for attacks without the buy-in of local communities and leaders. Now, pausing there, recognising this local support does not mean that Myanmar equated all villagers, regardless of age or gender, as ARSA supporters and then, by extension, as terrorists who could be legitimately attacked and killed, as was argued by the Gambia on Wednesday. Rather, local support refers to the way in which ARSA was structured at the village level and the way in which it would trigger last-minute mobilisation, to use the wording of the FFM, from within the local community. So before I move on, allow me to be completely clear. When Myanmar refers to, quote, supporters, unquote, Myanmar, like the FFM, is referring to local villagers who, though not formal ARSA members, joined in ARSA's violence when called to do so. When Myanmar uses the word supporters, it does not mean those who merely sympathised with ARSA or agreed with its aims. It means active, adult participants in terrorist activities. The phrase men, women and children is a reflection of the unfortunate fact that youths, who in most societies would be counted as children, were not uncommonly in the rank and file of those confronting the military, thereby putting themselves in the way of harm and being indistinguishable from older persons, as can also be observed in other countries. Returning to the assessment of ARSA, the International Crisis Group's assessment of ARSA does not stand alone. The FFM reached similar conclusions regarding ARSA's level of organisation and capabilities. The FFM expressly considered the perception that ARSA was, quote, a poorly armed and poorly trained group, unquote. However, it concluded that ARSA met the definition of a non-state armed organisation because the group evidenced various characteristics, including a command structure, an ability to launch coordinated or simultaneous attacks across different locations in a tightly controlled environment, an ability to mobilise among the Bengali community, the organisation of village cells, an ability to provide at least a core group with some military training and others with basic defence training, and an ability to obtain some firearms and produce some improvised explosive devices and other handmade weapons. Even the witness statements provided by the Independent Investigative Mechanism for Myanmar, which I'll shorten to the IIMM, contradict the Gambia's depiction of ARSA. Now, as Dr. Staker has explained, Myanmar does not accept that the IIMM material has any evidential weight. Despite this, the IIMM material, unlike the FFM material, is at least intended to be material for use in judicial proceedings. If the Gambia were to rely on anything, it would be expected to rely on the IIMM material rather than the FFM material. However, the Gambia places very little reliance on the IIMM material for the very reason that it does not assist the Gambia's case. 4 witness statements of the IIMM are of relevance to the point that I am now addressing. All are from Bengali Muslims. All are avoided by the Gambia. I will focus on the statement of P4715, as this was provided to parties after the written pleadings had closed. He describes in detail ARSA's senior leadership and governance structure, including the existence of the Shura Group. He explains that the Shura Group was led by an individual based in Saudi Arabia and consisted of about 21 people. Atta-Ullah, as Commander-in-Chief, was part of this group. Within the group was a smaller decision-making committee of 11 people, which was itself split into 2 subgroups. One subgroup for fighting and soldiers, and the other an executive decision-making group. This sophisticated structure, described by P4715, plainly contradicts the Gambia's claim that the group was poorly organised. All this evidence, taken from various different sources, shows that Myanmar has not sought to, quote, inflate ARSA into something akin in size and strength to an omnipotent and omnipresent guerrilla force, as the Gambia with great exaggeration claims. Rather, Myanmar simply presents the relevant available evidence. If the Gambia wishes to make claims about ARSA's strength or lack thereof, it might be expected that it would seek to substantiate them. But it appears that the Gambia is unable or unwilling to do that. While assessing a terrorist group's strength in numbers is not straightforward, from a review of the available evidence, it is clear that between October 2016 and August 2017, ARSA's membership and support base grew stronger. Further, the evidence shows that there was a large-scale mobilisation of supporters shortly before ARSA's August 2017 attacks. Records from Myanmar's Ministry of Home Affairs assessed that 17,600 Bengali were involved in ARSA's attacks, a figure which is supported by, 1, the evidence of an ARSA member who estimated that, prior to the August 2017 attacks, there were 10,000 ARSA members in Mungdao Township alone, and 2, Amnesty International's assessment that by 25 August 2017, ARSA was able to mobilise around several thousand members and supporters. Thus, the material before the court indicates that, by August 2017, ARSA had become a highly organised and well-established terrorist organisation, with a significant membership and extensive support base interwoven into the villages in northern Rakhine State. It had clear lines of command and used communication platforms such as WhatsApp to coordinate its activities. It was this support base, comprising of ordinary villagers, which responded to Atta-Ullah's call to arms on 24 August 2017, when he instructed cell leaders to mobilise all male villagers over the age of 15. This sophisticated group also had a clear objective: to attack Myanmar's security apparatus with a view to gaining complete control over northern Rakhine State. Even in the face of all this evidence, the Gambia's reply contends that ARSA did not have sufficient resources to mount a true challenge to the Myanmar Defence Services. but the attacks planned and perpetrated by ARSA in 2016 and 2017 show this argument to be false. Mr. President, members of the Court, this brings me to the second part of my presentation. The Gambia argues that ARSA's terrorist attacks were used as a pretext to destroy the Rohingya. This pretext argument is predicated on an extremely narrow focus. That is, the events leading up to ARSA's August 2017 attacks. This pretext argument simply airbrushes ARSA's 2016 attacks and their consequences from the Gambia's narrative. This airbrushing was particularly noticeable in the Gambia speech dealing with the overview of the clearance operations given on Tuesday, where, despite repeatedly stating that the clearance operations proceeded in two waves, the first wave of October 2016 was always skipped. As a result, the Gambia is able to present a misleading impression of the evidence. The Gambia's pretext argument suffers from at least four major flaws. First, events in 2017 cannot be divorced from ARSA's attacks in 2016 and its activities leading up to the August 2017 attacks. Evidence about this period explains the seriousness of the terrorist threat which Myanmar faced in northern Rakhine State and its legitimate response to it. The Gambia's attempt to start the clock in 2017 is self-serving, apparently aimed at giving the false impression of unprovoked attacks against peaceful villages. The plain fact is that northern Rakhine State was not at peace before August 2017. Instead, ARSA's major resort to violence began in 2016, when on 9 October it attacked 3 border guard police posts. These coordinated attacks hit posts in Chikanpien in Maung Dao Township, Nyakuya, also in Maung Dao Township, and Kotankok in Ratidon Township. The attacks involved over 400 armed Bengali Muslims. Further clashes occurred between 10 and 12 October 2016, including one in which 4 soldiers were killed. The International Crisis Group noted that these 2016 attacks reflected an unprecedented level of planning and described them as a major escalation of violence in Rakhine. Understandably, Myanmar responded by commencing counter-terrorism operations for short periods to restore stability and to protect the civilian population. ARSA's insurgency flared up again in November 2016. On 12 November, the military clashed with ARSA near Puen Phu Chung. Thereafter, several skirmishes occurred during which ARSA, supported by several hundred armed villagers, shot at troops. Later that day, there were several IED incidents, including 2 attacks on government forces. In terms of casualties from the 2016 attacks, the government estimated at the time that 69 ARSA terrorists, 7 Tatmadaw soldiers and 10 police officers were killed. It also estimated that 5 Tatmadaw soldiers and 6 police officers were injured. 234 Bengali were arrested. The International Crisis Group described ARSA's offensive in 2016 as qualitatively different from anything in recent decades. It observed that this well-organised, apparently well-funded group was a game changer in the Myanmar government's efforts to address the complex challenges in Rakhine State. The report concluded with the observation that all indications are that ARSA is preparing further attacks on security forces and retains the capability to do so. Those observations proved correct. Between November 2016 and August 2017, ARSA did not lie dormant. The evidence shows that the group consolidated its authority and undertook extensive preparations for and carried out further attacks. To this end, it set up training camps, stockpiled weapons, sourced explosives and bomb-making material, terrorised and killed civilians from Bengali and non-Muslim communities alike, and embarked on a recruitment campaign. None of this evidence about ARSA's 2016 attacks and subsequent terrorist activities appears to be disputed by the Gambia. Instead, it is simply ignored. The only plausible explanation for avoiding this evidence is that it fatally undermines the pretext argument by explaining why Myanmar took certain steps in Rakhine State from October 2016 onwards. All these steps were responsive and legitimately directed at addressing a group which had already engaged in terrorism and was legitimately believed to be planning further terrorist acts in the future. This brings me to the second major flaw in the pretext argument. By starting the court's consideration of ARSA's actions in August 2017, the Gambia is able to falsely portray the measures taken by Myanmar after the October 2016 attacks in a sinister light. They were described by the Gambia on Tuesday as preparatory acts. However, when the events of 2016, which I've just described, are properly considered, this argument dissolves. From November 2016, Myanmar was not pre-planning a genocidal attack. Rather, it was taking steps to minimise the risk of and to be prepared in the event of any further ARSA violence. It's instructive to consider these measures in turn. First, military build-up. Following October 2016 and prior to August 2017, there was a build-up in military capacity in northern Rakhine State to protect the civilian population from attack by ARSA and its supporters. The Gambia dismisses this purpose out of hand, arguing Myanmar offers no proof in support. But that is clearly not correct when it is properly considered in the context of the 2016 violence, which the Gambia ignores. Further, Myanmar denies arming ethnic Rakhine groups and militia for any nefarious purpose. Rather, in the wake of the October 2016 attacks, the authorities publicly announced an initiative to recruit non-Bengali citizens to a new regional force, and the recruits would serve in their own village. Second, the confiscation of multipurpose tools. Contrary to the Gambia's assertion, the removal of items from villagers which had the potential to be used as weapons was a sensible precautionary measure. Any assertion that it was not is contradicted by other sources. Bengali were allowed to keep small knives when the government collected the larger weapons. Third, the removal of fences. This prohibition was only on the type of material which could be used, a fact not mentioned by the Gambia. There was no order to remove fences completely, IIMM witnesses also contradict the argument that this measure was taken to render the Bengali population more vulnerable. These witnesses explain that villagers were asked to remove fences as, quote, bad people, unquote, were able to hide behind them, and also to use them to launch, quote, a sneak attack, unquote. Villagers were allowed to retain fencing around toilet facilities. Fourth, curfews were imposed. This was necessary and proportionate measure in the aftermath of the October 2016 violence. Restrictions were not uniform, but tailored to the security needs of particular areas at particular times. And the curfews did not apply to Bengali alone, but affected other ethnic communities. Fifth, Myanmar did not use starvation to prepare Bengali for destruction or at all. At no point does the Gambia point to a single instance where any Bengali died of starvation by any Myanmar policy. The reality is that access to food was impacted by the security operations in northern Rakhine State, triggered by ARSA's activities. The evidence shows that Myanmar ensured the supply of food to affected Bengali communities when it was safe to do so. Access to healthcare was also not deliberately restricted. Rather, as noted by the FFM, all communities in Rakhine State had inadequate access to healthcare, simply due to a lack of development rather than anything more sinister. Finally, and as Mr Blom-Cooper will demonstrate in more detail in due course, the Gambia provides no evidence to support the claim that Myanmar targeted leaders within the Bengali community. Rather, the evidence shows that 1. ARSA targeted Bengali leaders and other Bengali civilians who it suspected of colluding with the government, and 2. Myanmar lawfully arrested and detained certain Bengali, including local leaders, on suspicion of being part of ARSA, an unsurprising act given ARSA's structure, which involved village-level cells led by local leaders. Our third reason for dismissing the pretext argument is that it is founded on a misrepresentation of the scale of ARSA's 2017 attacks. The Gambia tries to downplay them by describing them as, quote, at most, ARSA's attacks on several police and border guard posts, unquote. This is not correct. Following Ataula's call to arms on 24 August 2017, in the early hours of 25 August, ARSA launched simultaneous, coordinated attacks on some 30 border guard police posts and 1 military headquarters in northern Rakhine State. Thereafter, until 31 August 2017, a further 52 ARSA attacks were orchestrated against the security services in northern Rakhine State. The Myanmar Institute for Peace and Security recorded 119 individual incidents involving ARSA, including armed clashes and IED explosions. The FFM was able to corroborate 17 separate attacks, including the attack against the army base 552, and said that there is credible information that an additional 17 attacks took place. Even taking this figure at face value, the contention that ARSA merely carried out several attacks in August 2017 cannot be maintained. Amid this wave of ARSA violence, on 28 August 2017, Atta Ullah ordered his followers to burn down villages as part of the attacks. ARSA then declared a temporary ceasefire on 10 September 2017. The wording of the press release is revealing. As you will see on your screen, ARSA declared a temporary cessation of offensive military operations in Maung Dao, Buthidaung and Rathidaung townships for a 1-month period to allow humanitarian assistance. ARSA also urged the Burmese government to reciprocate. So this is an acknowledgement by ARSA itself that it was involved in a wide-scale offensive military operations against the government and was sufficiently organised to state a willingness to engage in a ceasefire and to issue a press release about it. All of this contradicts the Gambia's narrative about ARSA and its capabilities. Bringing this together, ARSA's attacks in 2017 were geographically widespread and deadly. As Mr. Blom-Cooper and I will set out in our later presentations, these incidents generally involved ARSA terrorists and their supporters attacking in their hundreds. While it is accepted that not every attacker had a firearm, they were, in the main, all armed with some weapon and able to attack in considerable numbers. It is against this background that Myanmar's response must be considered. Any attempt to minimise ARSA's actions in 2017 should be rejected. Finally, the Gambia's pretext argument is shown to be false and thus should be dismissed because it undermines its own case. The Gambia's case theory, in terms of the purported objective and planning of the, quote, clearance operations, unquote, is grounded in statements made and actions taken by Myanmar after October 2016, in the period up to August 2017. This is evident from an analysis of Section 2 of Chapter 10 of the Gambia's Memorial, which deals with the objectives and planning of the clearance operations, and Sections 1 and 2 of Chapter 7 of the Gambia's Reply, which deal with the same topics. But the underlying acts relied on by the Gambia to prove the actus reus of genocide relate to crimes allegedly committed during the operations themselves in October and November 2016 and August 2017. In fact, as I will discuss in my second presentation, in 11 out of the 46 locations in which the Gambia claims that genocide was committed, the alleged acts occurred in October or November of 2016 only. This begs the following questions. What evidence does the Gambia rely on to prove the objective and planning for those 2016 crimes? How was the objective expressed prior to October 2016? What planning was undertaken? The answer to all these questions is that the Gambia relies on very little evidence. It appears it has failed to consider this period in any detail at all. The Gambia refers to only 2 matters that predate October 2016. The first is a 2012 statement issued by the Rakhine Nationalities Development Party, which the Gambia says likens the presence of Rohingya to a terrorist attack. This is not correct. The statement simply calls the burning of houses by Rohingya terrorists a terrorist attack. The second is an order issued on 9 June 2016 in Maung Dao Township, prohibiting the use of zinc sheets as fences. These two items are clearly insufficient and highlight a huge gap in the Gambia's case theory. In relation to the part of its case theory it has tried to flesh out, that is, the claimed objective of the operations conducted from August 2017, the Gambia relies on various statements made by Senior General Minon Lin, by soldiers, and in statements of claimed victims. But as Professor Tolman will explain later, the Gambia's arguments are without any merit. The Gambia's case theory is further undermined by the evidence which shows that the security forces did differentiate between civilians and terrorists. For example, by stating their intention was to identify, quote, bad people in villages, which was clearly a reference to ARSA and its supporters. The reality is that the Gambia's case theory is completely confused, and the pretext argument just adds to the confusion. While the Gambia wishes to skate over the 2016 violence, it does still maintain that the genocidal violence started then. This was, quote, the first wave. The question which arises is, why did it stop for 9 months? There's no allegation of massive killings or brutal violence between November 2016 and August 2017. The reason for this is simple. On each occasion that ARSA initiated violence, as soon as the ARSA threat was neutralised, the activities of the security forces stopped. Had their true intention been to destroy the Bengali, they would not have stopped. In sum, the pretext argument is predicated on a series of misrepresentations which result in the Gambia undermining its own case. The inevitable conclusion is that there is no compelling and coherent evidence that the purpose of the counter-terrorism operations was to destroy the Bengali population as such. I turn now to the third part of my presentation, in which I will demonstrate the impact of ARSA on the evidence which is before this court. Much of the Gambia's evidence consists of witness statements or interview records taken from Bengali living in camps in Bangladesh. Bengali in camps in Bangladesh are also the almost exclusive source of the information about events during the 2016 and 2017 operations found in the reports of the FFM and other bodies on which the Gambia relies. However, ARSA has had from the beginning, and in fact continues to exert, such an influence over camp residents in Bangladesh that their accounts cannot be accepted as credible and reliable. The Gambia's response is to contend that Myanmar offers no evidence that witnesses feared or were intimidated by ARSA, or that their testimonies were so influenced. This is manifestly wrong. There is a wealth of evidence to this effect. Myanmar's written pleadings give clear examples of how a fear of ARSA has had an intimidatory effect on what witnesses are prepared to say about ARSA and has caused them to make false or misleading claims about the military. The Gambia simply refuses to engage with this evidence. Examination of multiple NGO and media sources show that ARSA controls and influences life in the camps in Bangladesh. In fact, in the camps, the perceived influence of ARSA is so extensive that some dub them the night government. But this night government is not a benevolent authority. Rather, ARSA is reportedly involved in widespread criminal activity within the camps, including murder, extortion and kidnapping. Reports corroborated in part by the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Myanmar. A further source reports that, quote, both Bangladesh police and Rohingya accused the militant group ARSA of conducting a campaign of terror and crime in the refugee camps and, quote, ARSA has become a name of terror in the camp. In fact, in March 2025, Bangladeshi authorities arrested ARSA leader Atta Ullah on charges of murder, illegal entry, sabotage and militant activities. ARSA's terror has directly impacted the testimony presented in this case. There is ample credible evidence that witnesses have been and remain fearful of ARSA. This fact acts as a potent deterrent to them giving a true and accurate account of ARSA's role in the attacks in 2016 and 2017. This chilling effect was noted by the FFM, which described a widespread reluctance of Rohingya to talk about ARSA and any alleged abuses committed by it. The FFM is not alone in raising this concern. The US State Department observed that the presence of ARSA in the refugee camps likely gave pause to some refugees who might otherwise identify ARSA as perpetrators. ARSA's involvement in the violence thus is likely underreported. As this court will come to learn, this chilling effect does not merely minimise ARSA's central role in the events of 2016 and 2017, it virtually erases mention of ARSA altogether. Of note is that while many camp residents have spoken to several organisations over the years about events in 2016 and 2017, there is virtually no reference by any of them to ARSA, even though ARSA instigated the violence in that period. Numerous examples of individuals failing to mention ARSA when mention might reasonably be expected are identified in chapters 3, 8 and 9 of Myanmar's written pleadings. Against this background, the failure to mention ARSA is inexplicable, unless that failure is due to manipulation by ARSA, a fear of or loyalty to ARSA, or a combination of these factors. The credibility and reliability of such interviews is severely compromised by the failure of the interviewees to provide a full account of events, which must necessarily include reference to ARSA's role. The written pleadings also provide some examples of witnesses who have tried to explain, albeit briefly given their fear, ARSA's control over the evidence that they are able to provide, or perhaps more accurately, not provide. One such example is a 31-year-old Bengali who, in relation to abuses perpetrated by ARSA during 2016 and 2017, told Fortify Rights. Many of these Al-Yaqin ARSA people are already here in the Bangladesh camps, but most people won't say anything because they will be killed here. The Al-Yaqin are here. Nobody will disclose these things because they are very afraid. Finally, the Gambia's own evidence supports the conclusion that ARSA is a real and present threat in the camps. Nicholas Kumjin, head of the IIMM, notes, the security concerns raised by many Rohingya witnesses also pertain to the inherently unstable and at times objectively dangerous situation in the refugee camps in Bangladesh. He states that numerous witnesses have reported threats and concerns ranging from targeted killings by organised armed groups in the camps to kidnappings for ransom or extortion. One of the main organised armed groups is ARSA. That is clear from the multiple NGO and media sources Myanmar references in its written pleadings. Mr. President, members of the Court, I now come to the fourth and final part of my presentation, which concerns the Kha Maung Seik massacre and its aftermath. This is perhaps the starkest demonstration that the Gambia's claim that Myanmar offers no evidence to show how fear and intimidation have influenced the testimony of witnesses is simply wrong. As can be seen from the written pleadings, Myanmar has submitted NGO reports, media reports, relevant extracts of the FFM report, 2 witness statements, and now a witness to give her evidence in person, all to provide this court with a clear, concrete example of how ARSA manipulates accounts of events through fear and intimidation. The Gambia has no answer to this evidence. The appalling events in Kha Maung Seik village track on 25 August 2017 and the experience of the survivors draw together several themes covered in Myanmar's case, not just ARSA's control over and manipulation of the narrative, and I will look at these in turn. First, ARSA attacked several villages in Kha Maung Seik village track on 25 August 2017. As you will see on the map on the screen, Kha Maung Seik is in the north of Mungdo Township. The attack was part of the wave of attacks ordered by Ataullah the previous day. As such, the attack demonstrates ARSA's strength and capabilities, including its command structure and its ability to launch simultaneous attacks across different locations, all of which was facilitated by the use of encrypted communications platforms. In this village track, ARSA first struck a border guard police post before attacking Hindu communities. The attackers rounded up Hindu men, women and children. According to a report by Amnesty International, the ARSA attackers killed the vast majority of the Hindu who had been rounded up, many, if not most, by slitting their throats, and abducted the rest. Those killed included children. At least 99 Hindu were killed, according to Amnesty International. The Gambia does not appear to dispute that this massacre occurred and presents no evidence to contradict Myanmar's evidence. However, it carefully avoids any detailed discussion of this incident, referring to it as the alleged killing by ARSA of several Hindu. Second, the attack on Kha Maung Seik is an example of how ARSA targeted non-Muslim, which, quote, sowed fear among Hindu and other ethnic communities, unquote. In fact, a further 6 Hindu, 2 women, a man and 3 children were killed by ARSA terrorists the following day at Myo Tulji. Third, ARSA's attack on Kha Maung Seik was a primary trigger for the response by Myanmar's security services. The security services did not unilaterally decide to move to that area as a pretext to engage in a massive campaign of genocidal violence. Instead, on 25 August 2017, the Rakhine state government informed the union government in the capital Naypyidaw about the attack on Kha Maung Seik and requested immediate rescue as the local police were outnumbered. In response, the Myanmar Defence Services arrived later that same day. This incident, involving the killing of nearly 100 people by ARSA, exposes the absurdity of the Gambia's pretext argument. Fourth, the Gambia's allegations concerning crimes committed by the Myanmar Defence Services, the Border Guard Police and local Rakhine at Kha Maung Seik must be considered against both ARSA's attacks at the location, which I have already discussed, and ARSA's subsequent efforts to blame others for its abuses, which I will discuss shortly. 3 allegations are levelled by the Gambia. First, the killing of a male, said to have been witnessed by his wife. The second, the killing of more than 100 people, including men, women and children, by having their throats slit, and some pregnant women having their stomachs cut open, said to have been witnessed by Rashida, a Bengali Muslim. And third, the throwing of children into a river, also said to have been witnessed by Rashida. None of these allegations are credible or reliable. In relation to the alleged killing of the male, save for the incident at Indin, which I will discuss in my second presentation, Myanmar denies that soldiers engaged in extrajudicial killings. That said, even if this allegation could be proved, the Gambia's presentation of the evidence is deceptively incomplete. The description of this incident is taken from a report by Fortify Rights, but the Gambia does not include the full description in its memorial. According to the report, when the male, quote, was being tied up, he was told that he killed and cut people, unquote. This suggests that the person in question was suspected of being involved in the ARSA attack, rather than being targeted simply because he was Bengali. As regards Rashida's uncorroborated allegations, her description of the killing of more than 100 people bears an uncanny resemblance to the massacre of the Hindu perpetrated by ARSA. The same manner of death, the same number of people. As I'm moving to explain, ARSA went to considerable effort to blame the military and ethnic Rakhine for its own crime, including by coercing the female Hindu survivors to give false accounts of what happened. Rashida's allegations have all the hallmarks of being a product of those efforts. Of note is that Rashida's allegations comprise one of the sources referred to during the Gambia's presentation on sexual violence and the assertion that Myanmar's military forces targeted females of reproductive age, including pregnant women, inflicting reproductive injury. Fifth and finally, ARSA's intimidation of the survivors of the Kha Maung Seik massacre provides a clear example of how ARSA manipulates witness testimony, in this case by forcing the surviving women to appear on camera in Bangladesh, implicating other perpetrators, which was the conclusion reached by Amnesty International. There were 16 survivors of the massacre, 8 women and 8 children. All were abducted and taken by ARSA to camps in Bangladesh. These women and their children were spared because they agreed to convert from Hinduism to Islam and to marry men selected by ARSA fighters. Shortly after arriving in Bangladesh on 28 August 2017, the women were forced to make false statements to the media, claiming that the massacre had been carried out by ethnic Rakhine villagers and the Myanmar Defence Services. One of the survivors, Ma Po Mi Lar, explains in her November 2017 witness statement to the Myanmar investigation team, "The ARSA terrorists said, 'The media are coming later. When they come, tell them that it was Tatmadaw, the police, and the Rakhine who killed you Hindu. If you don't do as we say, we will kill you when the media go back.' Afterwards, while the terrorists brought the media to interview us, we told the media the way we were taught because we didn't want to be killed." The evidence of this survivor is corroborated by two others, Ma Pujar, whose contemporaneous witness statement is before the court, and Bina Bala, who was interviewed by Amnesty International. Contemporaneous video evidence of the survivors making such false statements because of ARSA's intimidation will be shown to you later in these hearings, alongside the evidence of one of the women shown in that video. You may be struck by the ease with which such summary, false allegations were procured from these fearful witnesses. ARSA's intimidation of and attempts to control the survivors did not cease following their rescue from the camp. The survivors told Amnesty International in an interview given in April 2018 that they continued to, quote, receive threatening calls and messages when quoted by media outlets, implicating ARSA or other Rohingya as the perpetrators, unquote. None of this evidence is directly challenged by the Gambia. Indeed, how can it be, given the wealth of evidence that exists? In sum, what this demonstrates is that the court cannot accept the evidence of residents of the camps in Bangladesh at face value and as credible and reliable. Evidence from multiple sources makes abundantly clear that ARSA effectively and deliberately uses coercion to control the narrative given about events of 2016 and 2017 by those living in the camps. The Gambia's claim otherwise is simply wrong. Mr. President, members of the court, I conclude with the following 6 points. 1. By 2016, ARSA was a professional, well-organised and trained group. 2. ARSA executed multiple simultaneous deadly attacks on state security locations in October 2016, November 2016 and August 2017. 3. Myanmar was required to respond as ARSA attacked the country's security infrastructure and personnel, massacred civilians and threatened the stability and development of the entire area. 4. There is no basis upon which it could be concluded that the security forces would have intervened but for the ARSA attacks. 5. The criminal conduct of ARSA has continued within the camps in Bangladesh. There is a pervasive climate of fear of ARSA amongst camp residents who dare not speak out against the organisation for fear of reprisals. This has affected the credibility and reliability of claimed eyewitness accounts given by those in the camps. 6. The Kha Maung Seik massacre and its aftermath provides a paradigm case study for the court as it draws together several recurring themes in this case. It demonstrates ARSA's ability to launch serious attacks on state apparatus and civilians in the same location. It is an example of Myanmar responding to ARSA's violence at the request of the local authorities who are under attack. It highlights the weakness of the evidence that the Gambia relies on to prove the commission of crimes by Myanmar Defence Services personnel. And it provides a concrete example of ARSA's control and manipulation of witness evidence through fear and intimidation. Mr. President, that concludes my presentation this afternoon, and it also concludes Myanmar's presentation for the day. Thank you for your kind attention.
I thank Ms. Lowry, whose statement brings this sitting to a close. The oral proceedings in the case will resume on Monday, the 19th of January at 10 a.m., when Myanmar will continue its first round of oral argument. The sitting is closed.